Hey, everybody. I wanted to talk to you about tomorrow's general election here in the United Kingdom and the issue of decency. I'm not here to talk to you to say who to vote for. That's a personal decision, and you've got to make that. But I wanted to raise this general concern I've got that has come up before the election, but especially during the campaign, about just being good to each other, whether we're politicians or citizens. Let me start off with a story that happened to me yesterday. Um, I was giving an interview with a London station called Talk Radio and a host named Julia Hartley Brewer about an incident that occurred on Monday. Now, on Monday, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he's the leader of the Conservative Party, he was presented with a reporter about a case of a 4-year-old boy who had been photographed on the floor of a hospital suffering from pneumonia because there weren't any beds. And this was sort of a symbolic picture of the issues we have with our National Health Service. A lot of demand on it, overworked doctors and nurses, underinvestment of facilities, and the result is that waiting times have gone up. Indeed, on the day that this incident occurred, a report came out from a highly respected medical analyst which said almost 5,500 people have died in the past 3 years in the UK because of excessive waiting times, because they had to wait more than 6 hours to see a doctor. So we've got this 4-year-old boy, and Boris Johnson is presented with this image on a journalist's phone, and the journalist says, well, Prime Minister, what do you have to say about this? What do you have to say? And Johnson keeps evading the issue, talking about, oh, yes, we'll invest in the National Health Service, and the reporter's going, look at the picture, look at the picture. And Johnson sticks the phone in his pocket. And it's only when the journalist shames him, says, Prime Minister, you've taken my phone and hidden that picture, that Johnson gets it out, looks like, oh, this is terrible, oh, this is awful, and tries to mutter a few, token words of empathy, which he had singularly failed to show up to that point. Now, that was what I was supposed to talk about on Tuesday on Talk Radio. But the host, Julia Hartley Brewer, shifted gears here and said, but how do we know that picture was real? How do we know it wasn't staged? And she said, we've got unconfirmed reports from nurses that this was set up. Now, I didn't know what these unconfirmed reports were, so I simply said at the moment, I said, look, I don't play unconfirmed, and I don't, because there's a lot of rumor, there's a lot of disinformation out there, so I don't play unconfirmed. And I went back to the broad issue of it's not just this 4-year-old boy. It's many, many people in Britain who are having to suffer because we've got the issue of underinvestment in our National Health Service, that we're just not keeping up with what is needed to provide a decent standard of care. And Hartley Brewer kept going back, oh, you could see the wheel of a trolley, and oh, maybe the mother had placed him on the floor. The mother had placed him on the floor to stage this photograph. So the issue was no longer Boris Johnson and dealing with the NHS. The issue was the mother. She was the suspect. She was the culprit. That really unsettled me. And it unsettled me later in the day when I found out what these unconfirmed reports were. They weren't reports at all. A cut and paste email was sent about on social media by hundreds of accounts repeating the same thing. I have a friend who is a nurse at the Leeds hospital where this occurred. She says that the mother staged this. Now, someone, and I think I know who it was, and I think they're very well placed in one of the campaigns of this country. You can guess which one. Deliberately sets out this disinformation, this fake news, if you will, which is picked up by those who want to believe that it's all a Labour Party conspiracy, that it's all activists who are trying to trash Boris Johnson, and it races and races and races until a talk radio presenter picks it up and makes it the centerpiece. Made it the centerpiece not only of our interview, but then in a tweet which went viral, put a portion of that interview up with the whole line of, oh, there's this incident of the 4-year-old boy, but Julia Hartley Brewer says unconfirmed reports. Ask if it really happened. In other words, the Twitter message reinforced the disinformation. It's not just one incident. So as we go into the election tomorrow, cards on the table. There is a level of lying, a level of deception, a level of disinformation, which is indecent. And the large majority of it, almost all of it, is coming from one party in this election. And it is coming from the man at the head of that party. I just want to be blunt with you. When Boris Johnson talks about Brexit in this election, his own deal that he is seeking to push through with the European Union to withdraw, he lies about it. I don't mean he's mistaken or wrong. He knows what he's doing. He's lying that there is no customs border between Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom, Great Britain, the rest of the United Kingdom, when quite clearly there is. When Northern Irish businesses know there is. When Northern Irish farmers know there is. And when the Democratic Unionist Party, which used to be the supporter of Johnson, or supporter of the Conservatives keeping them in government, the DUP knows that that's the case, and they have denounced Johnson for being untrustworthy. In other words, lying. He has lied about Brexit, or at least been deceptive when he says, "Oh, we can get a full deal, trade, the legal systems, the health and safety systems, the security system. We can get a full deal with the European Union by the end of 2020." When anyone who is involved with the process, when anyone who's an analyst knows it is not going to be able, you're not going to be able to get that deal in under a year. Remember, the average trade negotiation takes 4 years to complete, even if you say the EU and the UK have a previous history they could build on. And Boris Johnson knows he's being deceptive when he says that very quickly he could get a trade deal with the United States. When anyone will tell you that a trade deal with one of the largest economies in the world will take years to complete, unless you just simply surrender and give in to everything that the Americans ask of you. So Boris Johnson has lied about Brexit. But, and for those of you who consider this to be the primary issue in this campaign, as I do, public services, he has lied about that. He has lied that his government will build 40 hospitals. Their plan does not talk about building 40 hospitals. It only talks about 6 hospitals. And it doesn't talk about building hospitals. It talks about providing money for the refurbishment of 6 existing hospitals. There are no new hospitals. And Johnson has repeatedly lied about that. He initially lied that he was going to provide for funds to bring in 50,000 more nurses into the National Health Service. No, the provision was to try to retain 19,000 nurses that are in the health service and bring in an additional 31,000. Now, he has corrected that, but he has never admitted, for example, the effect on the NHS of Brexit when you shut out nurses who would come from the European Union. He has lied about, or at least been deceptive about, bringing 20,000 more police officers in, when in fact conservative governments have reduced the level of police officers by more than 20,000 in recent years. He has been deceptive when he has talked about funding for other services, misstating the amounts. He and his ministers have been deceptive about reducing the national insurance burden, saying that the average individual will soon be 500 pounds better off when the actual figure is less than 100 pounds, and it is not necessarily in the near future. He and his ministers have been deceptive by saying falsely that the number of homeless people has gone down in the past decade. It has actually surged under the conservative government. He and his ministers have been deceptive about the number of children who are in poverty and who are effectively homeless with their families. That number has increased. He has either been deceptive or lied on every major issue in this campaign. Brexit, National Health Service, education, policing, the economy. Mr. Johnson's background is not one of telling the truth. He was fired for plagiarism from the Times newspaper in the late 1990s. He has issued a series of statements in subsequent columns which have been questionable. On top of being deceptive, he has been racist. And I'm sure you know the remarks that he has made in print and in his statements about people of color, about Africans, about people of the Islamic faith. And he has lied about his personal life repeatedly. He has been deceptive about the number of children whom he has had by a number of different women. He has lied specifically about the American businesswoman Jennifer R. Curry, who received hundreds of thousands of pounds from the city of London when Boris Johnson was the mayor of that city, receiving hundreds of thousands of pounds and free business trips with London delegations simply because she was having an affair with Johnson, and he has repeatedly lied or been deceptive about that relationship. In 2016, he was involved in an affair, an extramarital affair, which led to further deceptions. And I can't say more about that because there was a court injunction that was put on that case days before the Brexit referendum. He has lied and been deceptive in the Brexit referendum himself, being involved, for example, with the claim, which he knew to be false, that Britain would get £350 million per week back from the European Union for the National Health Service, when that figure was Britain's gross contribution to the EU and not any type of net return if it decided to leave Europe. In other words, the leader of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister, is a man with a decades-long record of deceit and falsehoods. And the deceit and falsehoods have been weaponized in this election deliberately by those who are advising him, notably a man named Dominic Cummings, whom we could spend an entire podcast talking about and his own record of deception. But let me get back to why I was so troubled. Okay, politics is a rough and tumble business. Sometimes politicians are, quote, to use the wonderfully British phrase, economical with the truth. But it's not just deception or lies here. This is now extended to the point of when caught out over deception, when caught out over lies, or when in trouble, this Prime Minister and his advisors are willing to run roughshod over victims and to make victims into culprits, which is what they did with the mother of that 4-year-old boy suffering from pneumonia on the floor of a Leeds hospital, which is what they did a week earlier when, and if you'll go to the EA Worldview channel, we've got a full video on this, Boris Johnson responded to the London Bridge attack, in which Jack Merritt was one of 2 victims, by issuing the knee-jerk, politicized reaction, we will bang away convicted terrorists for life, being deceitful about the status of early release, because automatic early release was ended in the UK in 2013. And then Johnson's supporters then turned against the father of Jack Merritt, who had just lost his son, when Merritt dare say that his son would have believed in rehabilitation and would not have believed in locking away the key. And it was Merritt rather than Johnson who then became the focus of attacks to cover up any problems the Prime Minister might be suffering. I've seen this before. This is the other reason why I bring this to you. I've seen this in the United States. I've seen this in the last few years, which is how you weaponize disinformation, you weaponize lies, and you do it to cover up the weaknesses or the difficulties for your candidate. And you know exactly who that candidate is because he's sitting in the White House, and his campaign, if they can survive impeachment and trial, will be doing the same thing next year. But it is in this country in which I live. 3 years ago, before the Brexit referendum, I made a video for the university which talked about my position on that referendum. Now, I have views on public services that are very firmly held. I believe in a national health service. I believe in education for all. I believe in decent housing that is safe housing for all. I believe in economic justice where people can be assured of jobs and assured of livelihoods. I believe in that. I believe that Brexit, and I'll be open here, would be terrible for Britain economically because it will lead quite likely to a recession and a significant loss in GDP, and socially because it'll be very divisive. But in that video 3 years ago, And in this video today, what I was talking about was decency, because 3 years ago, just before that Brexit referendum, someone who believed the disinformation, believed the lies about immigrants, who believed that immigrants were a threat overrunning the United Kingdom, a lie and a deception that was weaponized by certain parties in that referendum. He killed the Member of Parliament, Joe Cox, who I was fortunate to be acquainted with, whom I greatly admired. That video is still on YouTube, by the way. And if you want to know what I thought 3 years ago, have a glance, because I still believe the same thing today in this context. It's not my place to tell you how to vote. You vote for the people you believe in. And there are good people in all parties in this election. Parties in England, parties in Scotland, parties in Northern Ireland, parties in Wales. Not everyone in any party, not even the majority, are engaged in the lies and deceptions. And we should also acknowledge that other parties are not whiter than white in terms of issues. Labor has been almost negligent at times, at least dilatory in dealing with anti-Semitism. The Lib Dems put out some leaflets that played fast and loose with polling. But at the end of the day, there is one party here that I want to identify in terms of the way that they've campaigned by furthering division through deception and through falsehood and by trashing the innocent. Because I'm not here to tell you how to vote. This video is not just for tomorrow. I hope it stays up after tomorrow and after the election, because whatever happens in the result on Friday, this country is in its most serious position since 1945. And to deal with those issues that concern all of us economically, socially, culturally, to deal with those issues that cut across religion, cut across race, cut across class, we've got to work with each other. We've got to work across lines and not retreat into tribal party camps that just simply says, I'm going to spread whatever story I can to protect my people and to trash yours. Because if we don't do that, on top of the effect of Brexit, will be the effect of stagnation and indeed not just recession, but a crumbling of what makes for a country. Because even if the United Kingdom is not united, even if Scotland goes its way, which is possible, even if Wales starts to edge towards that, and even if Northern Ireland begins to have real questions about its relationship with Great Britain, here in England, the foundations are crumbling as well. We got to be decent to each other, whatever happens tomorrow. Decent here in the United Kingdom. And of course, you folks, you be decent in the countries wherever you are. And I want to thank you all very much for listening. I'm going to go off and do some other media stuff now. And I'll be on from tomorrow morning talking about US matters. We can't talk about the UK election on the day of the election itself. And I'll be back on Friday to go through the result here. But like I said, it's not just the day-to-day politics. You know, if a puppy isn't just for Christmas, decency isn't just for Christmas either. Y'all remember that, and y'all take care.